My name is Jill Baker. I use she and her pronouns. I work for the Oregon Health Authority as the Youth Suicide Prevention Policy Coordinator, which is a role that I've had the honor of holding for a little over 4 years now. It's a special role to get to play, and I come to this work with both my head and my heart. My training and background is in school counseling, in social work, and restorative justice. I have a daughter and a brother who are suicide attempt survivors. And I'm a person who has experienced seasons of my own life when my brain struggled with thoughts of suicide. My family's genogram, like many other families, is saturated with mental health challenges and addiction. I find great hope in this work. I like figuring out the systems and challenging those systems to do better for my children, who are pictured here on the right, and for your children, and for the collective our children. I was reminded recently of the phrase that there are many ways to know something. And the longer I am a subject matter expert in this field, the shorter my what I know for sure list becomes. Thank you, Tony, for setting that up nicely earlier. And the more ways of knowing I feel drawn to and curious about. So thank you for giving us the chance to be here in this room with you today, to share what we think we know, and to be curious together about what we don't.
I'm Shanda Hostetler. I also use she, her pronouns. I work alongside of Jill at the Oregon Health Authority in youth suicide prevention on the Child and Family Behavioral Health team. Also with Bernardino. Shout out to Bernardino. My background is in social work and in generally being awkward. It's true. I come from a big family with many siblings, a mother whose depression disabled her for months at a time, and also whose costume box fills an entire room. I've spent most of my 42 years finding ways to build community and connection, believing in the importance of holding both the beauty and the pain. I've always believed that people are more than the struggle that we see, and suicide prevention is exactly those things. It's connection, it's belonging, it's making space for people to be fully themselves, to know that their pain is real, and to know that their strength is also very real, and to know that dark days do not define us.
Today, Shanda and I will be addressing the intersections between youth suicide and substance use, particularly as it relates to prevention and protective factors. We'll start with an update on the most current Oregon youth suicide data. We're going to talk about what creates safety and protection for our young people and are true in both suicide prevention and substance use. We'll talk about areas of shared areas of risk between suicide prevention and substance use, and from there we hope you will hear that suicide prevention is your business because it's everyone's business. We'll name what we hope you will do to join the efforts for suicide prevention as it relates to your work. And we'll leave you with some tools and resources that we hope will be useful in your work.
So take a deep breath with me. We're going to be talking about suicide. Suicide is a heavy topic, and we are humans, not robots. And what a good thing. So take a breath. Check your vibes, check your wellness. We've all been impacted or know someone who's been impacted by suicide. I work in suicide all day, every day, and even still sometimes, in some moments, the heaviness and the pain of it take my breath away. If you find grief showing up for you in ways that feel overwhelming, permission yourself to take care of you. For me, sometimes that means standing up, stretching, taking a drink, or stepping out of the room for a moment. You can do all those things in this space if you need to, as you need to. It might mean for you that you give yourself a neck massage. Let's just go ahead and just preventatively do that. So arms out and then
Is this primary prevention or harm reduction?
Yeah.
Right now.
Okay, so now that we're feeling grounded and ready, we're going to get into the data, but before we get into the data, and sometimes I say data and sometimes I say data, and I don't know which is right, there's a lot of caveats when you talk about the data, and so I have to go through all of them. So here, bear with me before we get to the actual really juicy numbers. Youth suicide death data is particularly tricky, and so it is released slowly. This spring, we received the final data from the CDC on 2021 youth suicide deaths for our country and our state. OHA watches more real-time data for our work, but that data is not finalized, and so we don't talk about that publicly. The most updated death data we have to look at publicly is from 2021, so that's what we'll look at. I also have to say that this data represents real human lives. Each number is a human being with a story whose life and death have impact in big ways. We will look at the data together for a bit here, and we must never forget as we do that, that represents real human lives. So when we look at data, we look at it in several ways. One way is through a count, which is quite simply a number of humans who have died by suicide. Rate is another way we look at data. Rate looks at 1 per 100,000. And that's not just the number of deaths, it's the number of deaths within a set number of people. And we are going to look at suicide death data for a moment here, not the whole time, I promise. And this is just one measure of suicide. There are other data that tell other stories and make a more robust story, such as unintentional overdose data, attempt data, health survey data, and emergency department data. If you would like to spend an entire day with me just looking at data, we could do that at another time. But today we'll be just looking at suicide death data. Within statistical analysis, we will sometimes refer to small numbers. This is never meant to suggest that humans represented in these numbers are small or their impact is small. Numbers can be small. The impact of human life lost is never small. Small numbers just mean lower statistical credibility and an elevated risk of privacy breach. Estimates with few cases tend to be unstable and prone to wrong interpretation. This is where we need to look to national trends, regardless of the counts, even small counts, so that they can all be considered in our suicide prevention work. Last caveat. Today, we'll focus a little bit on what the data is telling us, and we don't have time to dive fully into this part of it either, but it is important to note that our data systems, like our institutions, have been developed within systems of injustice, oppression, and racism. That is real, and it exists. So, with all of those caveats, it's data time. Here we go. So, this first chart is where we will start. When it was released this spring, the 2021 suicide death data contained for Oregon a clear case of two things are true. And the first thing that is true, you can see here. The bottom line on this chart is the US youth suicide death rate. The upper line is Oregon's rate, youth meaning age 24 and younger. You can see we as a state have been above the national average rate for many years. But what do we see happening in 2018? With the 2021 data, what we can see is true is that Oregon has experienced a 3-year decreasing trend in youth suicide deaths. We can see this is not true for the US nationally, and it's not on this chart, but I can tell you that this is not true for most US states. 2018 was a tough year for youth suicide. And something we did after that year has created some change. Oregonians intervened and turned the trend around. And it wasn't one thing, because suicide prevention is never one thing, it is many things. Oregonians created safety in new and impactful ways. Caring humans, you all found ways to connect, to create belonging, to save lives. Our lawmakers passed Addie's Act, increased support for schools, funded youth suicide prevention for the first time statewide. Schools were asked to think about what student success looks like for students that have often been ignored and whose success has not usually been allowed to be a guiding measure for how we operate. Schools created plans for safety, belonging, and wellness, and it's working. I also need to say here that while we as a state experienced a 3-year decreasing trend, this decreasing trend has not been true for every community. You may live somewhere for which this decreasing trend didn't feel true. One suicide is too many. Some communities did not experience a decrease. So let's be clear, we have miles to go. And this thing is true. Oregon has saved the lives of young people, has done a lot of hard work. We went from being ranked, and you can see this on this chart, compared to other US states. In 2018, we were ranked the 11th highest rate of suicide, to 2021, where we were ranked the 22nd. To be clear, we want to be 50. We do not want to be number 1. And we went from 11th in 2018 to 22nd in 2021. That is a true thing. Now let's talk about another thing that is true, because I told you the data showed us that 2 things are true. Here we're looking at Oregon youth suicide deaths from 2018 to 2021 again, this time by race and ethnicity. Remember, these are the years of our 3-year decreasing trend. You'll probably notice the highest number of deaths were among non-Hispanic white people. But if we look closer, what we see clearly here is in 2018, there were 95 non-Hispanic white deaths, and in 2021, that number decreases to 59. And looking closer, when you add up the deaths among all the other race categories in 2018, the total is 31. And in 2021, the total is 31. So while we see non-Hispanic white suicide deaths trending down, we don't see that showing up in other race and ethnicity categories. We can't always measure what we prevent, and we can all clearly see that this is a mandate. We have to do better for our young people who are Black, Indigenous, Latina, Asian Pacific Islander, and all young people of color in our state. We have to center the wellness of young people from Black communities, from tribal communities, from Spanish-speaking communities, from communities of Asian and Pacific Islanders. And this is not a new mandate. This did not just show up this spring, to be clear. But this further solidifies that equity and anti-racism must be centered in all of our prevention work. So these 2 things are true. And before we move away from data, I want to look at one more data set. This data set looks at common circumstances at the time of youth suicide deaths, and because of the source of this data, it's looking at 2016 to 2020, so it's not the same years, but still worthwhile to take a look at. So what this tells us is that at least 25% of youth suicide deaths in this 5-year period, 2016 to 2020, were connected in some way to a substance use issue. And this tells us that figuring out suicide prevention and substance use prevention turns out are not separate tasks. These 2 approaches to the work need to be communicating, collaborating, joining efforts, and here we are. Our suicide death data give us cause actually for something to celebrate, a high five. We've seen a 3-year decreasing trend, one of only a handful of states that can say that. And our suicide data gives us cause to steady our footing because there is much work ahead. We have to increase wellness and safety for youth of color. 2 things can be true. We can honor the victory of lives saved, and we can commit to real, concrete action toward equity. And we have to find ways to do this together. So I invite you right now to give a high five to someone around you, and to steady your footing. Put your feet on the ground. Feel the ground beneath you. And then make eye contact real awkwardly with someone at your table or across the room. We have a lot of work to do. Our feet and our hands have got to get at it, and we're going to do this together.
Perhaps you've heard the story of the 3 sisters who were walking by a river that led to a dangerous waterfall. During their walk, they heard a cry and were startled to discover a young person had fallen into the river and was headed for the waterfall's edge. One sister dove into the river, brought the young person back to safety, performed CPR, and saved their life. The second sister began teaching swimming lessons and water rescue techniques and CPR to the nearby village. The third sister walked upstream to discover why the young person fell into the river in the first place. I used to think that this story was about naming that upstream prevention was the most important to focus on. And now I think that the story teaches us that all three are important, and that when it comes to substance use or suicide prevention, we need strong efforts in prevention, intervention, and postvention response. Let's start, though, with upstream prevention. Like we said, any data set that we use has strengths and limits. But with this most recent set of finalized data, we see a clear mandate for us to anchor into what we know works and to do better for young people of color. So how do we do that? Well, we wanted to start by looking at what we know increases protection and decreases risk for young people. Recently, the US Surgeon General released a report entitled Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation. This report brilliantly outlines the positive impacts on our health and well-being when we are socially connected, and points to the negative impacts when we are lonely or isolated. The 82-page report details impacts in very broad categories across physical, emotional, economic health. It includes things like cardiovascular health, diabetes and hypertension, infectious disease, educational benefits, economic impacts, impacts on cognitive functioning, and then, of course, things like depression, anxiety, suicide, and self-harm, all connected to loneliness and isolation. The OHA suicide prevention team believes, and will say over and over, as many times as people will listen, that connection is suicide prevention. Will you all say it too? Connection is suicide prevention. Turns out, we'll work on that together. We're not a choir yet, but the symphony will come. Turns out, at least according to the US Surgeon General, connection is prevention for many bad outcomes in our world. One way that our field talks about this concept is by referring to shared risk and protective factors. Protective factors, just like the term sounds, help shield or protect us from things like addiction, suicide, intimate partner violence, etc. While there are others, here are a few key components on the list of shared protective factors between substance use and suicide prevention that show up really clearly in current research. Notice what's at the top of the list, connectedness. I'm sure there are other 80-plus page reports out there on some of these other protective pieces too, but that brings me to my next point. Not all protective factors are created equal. They don't offer the same amount of protection. That is to say, some protective factors tend to be more protective than others. In our work, we like to refer to the sources of strength wheel as a model for what protective factors to look for in and with young people. This wheel shows 8 sources of strength that help young people, and frankly, adults too, to stay strong and get through hard things. The 8 categories include both people and practices that increase our wellness. Protective factors, with some having the capacity to be more protective than others. So let's take mentors, for example. Another way we talk about this with young people is having a trusted adult, someone who is either older than you or better than you at something. When a young person chooses to trust an adult who is trustworthy, that's incredibly protective for that young person. Some research shows that one trusted adult in a young person's life greatly reduces their statistical risk for suicide, and that 2 trusted adults nearly eliminates that statistical risk. The benefits of young people having a mentor or a trusted adult don't just include for the young person. The trusted adult also experiences more connection and therefore more protection against suicide. And when a young person has a trusted adult that they can name, the other young people in their social group experience benefits as well. They are more likely to have either that same trusted adult or be able to find a trusted adult of their own. I think we know and understand when one young person engages in risky or unsafe behavior in a social group, others in that community are more likely to engage in that same risky or unsafe behavior. #marijuana, right? And I am asking us to remember that when a young person chooses a healthy or a hopeful behavior, that also spreads in a social group. Just like some protective factors have more potential power than others, in our field of suicide prevention, some risk factors are also bigger pieces of the risk puzzle than others. For example, if you've ever taken a training in suicide prevention, you've seen a list of risk factors and warning signs. Risk factors mean someone is more likely to experience suicide thoughts if those things are present in their life or in their history. Warning signs being kind of a check engine light, the things that you should recognize as a current sign that somebody might be thinking about suicide. These lists often include things like moodiness, lack of hygiene, substance misuse, withdrawal from family. And if you, like me, are parenting a teenager, that list doesn't sound drastically different from normal adolescent development. The truth is, with suicide, almost anything can be a warning sign, and many things can be a risk factor. And it's important to consider whether something is a normal part of development or if it's also a potential sign that someone's brain is considering suicide. Here's what I mean. If someone has access to lethal means, especially a firearm, that needs attention. If young people or people with mental health struggles are in your life, any firearm in your home needs to be stored unloaded in a locked place, separate from ammunition, and to also lock the ammunition. That creates time and distance between a wave of suicidality and the ability to end their life. Access to a firearm with ammunition is a big puzzle piece in the risk factor picture. Other big puzzle pieces include a previous suicide attempt, as defined by the young person, no matter if the adult in their life didn't deem it as such, a suicide death of someone close to them, or a history of sexual abuse. That means if you love someone or work with someone with a client with those risk factors, and they tell you about thoughts of suicide, their risk for a suicide attempt is higher. And it's important to remember that protective factors are called that for a reason. Protective factors and their power give us great reason for hope in this field of suicide prevention. For example, you might know that young people who identify as LGBTQ2SIA+, are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their peers. But did you also know that when one affirming and accepted, trusted adult is in their life, that risk decreases by 40%? I crossed a bunch of stuff off here. Here's the thing that we think we know. We cannot neatly separate our body health from our mind health. These are 2 sides of the same coin. I grew up in a family with love and affection, kindness and nurture, and one who hid mental health challenges at all costs. I grew up in a working class, very religious family in rural Minnesota. I don't remember a single solitary conversation about mental health growing up. I just knew that my mom was often sad, and she sighed and she cried a lot, which my family teased her about mercilessly, both to her face and behind her back. In my undergraduate social work program, I had to do a genogram outlining the social histories and patterns of my family from my grandparents to me. We were supposed to look for things like behavioral health issues, education level, socioeconomic status, things like that. It was during the homework for that school project that I learned that my family history of suicide attempts, addiction, psychosis, inpatient stays for psychiatric care, and both diagnosed and undiagnosed depression and anxiety. I was 21 at the time and had already experienced my first season of suicidality without knowing or understanding my genetic risk due to my family history. I felt relieved that I wasn't alone and also incredibly dumbfounded that my family never talked about it. Our family tree was full of behavioral health issues. I'd like to tell you a story that serves as a loud example to me about how we address the needs of our minds versus when our bodies need something. My dad and oldest brother co-owned a logging business. They worked harder than anyone else I knew, and they only got paid after a job was done. This meant long periods of kind of making do in between getting paid. After finishing up a particularly large job of logging timber, they set to work cleaning up the job site. Cleaning up involved burning the scrap wood, the brush, small twigs, and branches that accumulated over the course of the job, and this was something they regularly did. My dad grabbed a gas can that he thought was full of diesel, which is less flammable than gasoline but still serves as an excellent fire starter, and headed to the top of a giant pile of brush to burn it. The can, in fact, contained old gasoline that had lost its potent smell, but still exploded into a fireball when my dad's torch touched its contents. Just want to pause and say my dad lives through this story. When my oldest brother saw my dad's clothes and hair and body on fire, he reacted as you might imagine. He helped my dad stop, drop, and roll, and then immediately got him into a pickup and raced him to the nearest emergency department for care. Do you know what he didn't do? He didn't stop for a single minute to try to mitigate the damage the fire was causing to the precious timber that had not yet been sold. He didn't bother to assess how much the fire department was going to charge them to put out the flames they were now at fault for. He didn't stop to verify whether my dad had health insurance, he didn't, or find out how much the out-of-pocket maximum was going to be. He didn't take time to chastise my dad for making an unsafe decision. He simply got my dad help. Of course he did. Now to lay a different story alongside that one. I have a family member who struggled mightily with addiction to pain medications, an addiction that started with the same storyline as so many others, with a medical professional who didn't yet know the dangers of over-prescribing these meds to a high school kid. Oh no, it'll be okay. Yep. I didn't bring any water up here and I'm gonna cry, but I'm not. This family member spiraled into their addiction, and predictably, their addiction impacted the rest of my family. My family worked hard, had respect from others in the community, loved Jesus, and didn't talk about it when our brains got sick. I won't go into a lot of the details because they're not mine to tell, but I can tell you that we took a lot of time wondering things like, does he just need a steady job? Something to get his mind off the drugs, you know? How much does treatment cost anyway? Does he even have health insurance to pay for treatment? Does he just need to get back to church? Why can't he make better decisions? I want to note here that we all do the best that we can with what we know at the time, and the best of intentions can still cause harm. There's room for grace for my family, all of them, and myself included in this story. And while getting help and hope and resources for addiction is not directly comparable to being a burn victim, sitting those two stories beside each other helps me remember that our mind health and our body health are intertwined. We cannot separate one from another.
Similarly, the worlds of suicide prevention and substance use are also intertwined. We want to think about a couple of the intersections we see between these two fields. And we haven't always done a great job of talking, so thank you, Bernardino, for inviting us today. In many ways, it's unhelpful at best and really harmful to silo these worlds of mental health and SUD treatment. SUD providers need to be equipped and confident in their ability to address and treat suicide, and mental health providers need to be equipped and confident in their ability to understand the role and impact substance use plays in someone's wellness journey. We are also two sides of one coin. We looked at earlier some of the data and saw on the chart the high prevalence of substance use in suicide deaths. This substance use, combined with access to lethal means, especially firearms, is a particularly dangerous recipe for our young people. One subject of conversation in our field is the thin line between unintentional overdose deaths and intentional overdose deaths, therefore suicide deaths, and we know that there's uncertainty there, and that uncertainty means that our youth suicide death numbers in Oregon are likely an undercount. And while it's not worthwhile to get too far into what we don't know here, we want to name that and say those things out loud. And if we are two sides of one coin, then honestly, the line between the two becomes fairly unimportant. And what is important is this: our young people deserve to live and be well. We all do better when we all do better. To quote the amazing Sharon earlier, there's a lot of work to be done, and here we are to do it. So we talked about that Oregon has seen this 3-year decreasing trend in youth suicide deaths, and people are often, their immediate question is like, why? What do we do? Because other states did not experience this. And suicide is complex. There is never one reason. Thereby, suicide prevention is also complex. But we know a few things that we suspect contributed. Oregon lawmakers allocated suicide prevention funding, so that allowed us at OHA to launch the Big River Suicide Prevention Program statewide and to increase funding for the Oregon Alliance to Prevent Suicide. Oregon lawmakers also passed ADDIE's Act, requiring every school district to have a policy to create a suicide prevention intervention and postvention plan. And in 2021, HB 2315 passed, which required all behavioral health providers, sub-providers included, to receive training in suicide prevention to renew their licenses or certifications. These three pieces meant that thousands of youth-serving adults have received training in suicide prevention, in recognizing risk, asking the question, how to do strength-based safety planning, how to do careful postvention. This resulted in more young people being screened for suicide risk and more young people having non-crisis conversations with adults about suicide. More youth-serving adults are better equipped to help young people heal from suicidal thoughts. It also meant that suicide prevention was a topic of conversation in planning spaces and policy writing outside of that moment of crisis. Oregon has a whole bunch of excellent resources. They'll be linked in our slide deck here that you will have access to through the magic of Bernardino. We have learned along the way of what effective suicide prevention looks like. We have an Oregon suicide prevention framework that is unique to us, and each year our Oregon suicide prevention champions choose initiatives. This year, we have 157 initiatives that were chosen by our community to work on to increase or to decrease youth suicide in our state. If you want to know more about that, it'll all be linked, and you can just like block out an entire afternoon and read that. You'll love it.
So, after all of this, what are we asking you to do? The truth is, in this work, there is literally always more to do. But we settled on 3 places that we're hoping you will start. First, we're asking you to get trained and to get really good at asking directly about suicide with your clients, with your loved ones, and with anyone you come across where your brain wonders whether they're thinking about suicide. We're asking you to figure out how to ask the question about suicide directly in a way that sounds like you. Just like any conversation that's incredibly important, you need to practice how you will ask. I usually say something like, wow, you've been through a lot of really tough stuff. Sometimes when life brings someone so much tough stuff, their brains start thinking about suicide. Is your brain thinking about suicide? That phrasing sounds like me, but find something that sounds like you. And then think through what you will do if the answer is, yes, I am thinking about suicide. I usually say something like, thank you so much for telling me. I'm going to help you figure out how to make sure that you have the resources that you need. I'm actually not sure what those are in your area, but let's call 988 together and to start figuring it out. I'm here with you. Then, know who is next on your flow chart for accessing help. Each county has a crisis team. Most have mobile crisis response. And if you don't have access to those services or can't find the number, remember you are never alone. 988 is available 24/7 in English and in Spanish.
And ASL.
Oh yeah, that's new. Second, get trained about how to reduce access to lethal means. We have a few really excellent training options available, which are on the charts that we put on your tables. We recommend Oregon Calm or Calm Online. Choose one of those. Suicide is often impulsive, and the wave of suicide often recedes with time. So reducing someone's access to a lethal method for ending their life can save their life. If you remember nothing else from our talk today, remember to encourage folks and check your own homes to store unloaded firearms in a locked place separate from ammunition and to also lock the ammunition. Third, in working with young people in particular, get really good at searching for and being curious about their protective factors in your interactions with them. We like to use the Sources of Strength wheel and invite you to check out some of the resources available using this framework. Ask about what helps young people when life is hard, what helps when suicide is loud, or when addiction is rearing its ugly head. What are the practices? Who are the people that help them? Encourage them to get stronger in these 8 areas of strength. Cheerlead them to strengthen their own wheel, and maybe spend some time working on your own wheel of strength, because young people need well adults in their lives too. If you are someone whose role includes ongoing support for young people, learn how to build and support a young person's safety plan and wellness plan.
There's several resources in our slide deck. There's a few on your table. You will find the Big River Suicide Prevention training options. This is not a recommendation that you take every single training on here. This is the menu of trainings that are available statewide. There are sheets that have recommendations for trainings by provider role. One is for schools, one is not for schools. They look the same. That was poor planning on my part. I will work on that. Thank you. We also have a safety plan linked in our slide deck and the sources of strength tools that you can use at home, which includes a youth wellness plan and a caregiver wellness plan. And you can use those sources of strength tools anywhere you want. The source of strength is not protective of those. You don't need to have a special training. Those are excellent tools, so take them and use them.
We wanted to end our time with you by speaking to those of you who love others living with addiction or suicide. If you're comfortable doing so, could you raise your hand if you have someone in your life that carries suicide thoughts or battles addiction? Dumb question. This part is for you. First, we see you. You hold hope when hope is hard to grasp. You keep learning and seeking more and better resources and podcasts and books and therapy options. You research, you listen, you show up, you connect, you stay till the end of the day on a Friday. And likely, you are tired. I get to be the mom to a couple of beautiful young people who have a trauma history. There's lots of complexities that enter into my family dynamics, and sometimes a thing will happen that stirs up feelings or reactions, and my kids aren't even sure why. It's hard. I have always been a person who believes in celebrating the wins, no matter how small. I believe in the power of hope, and that sometimes we need others to hold hope for us when things are just too bleak, too hard, too much. When it comes to suicide and addiction, the wins, or the good moments, can be brief, just quick glimpses of what healing could look like. And often those good moments are kind of sandwiched between really hard moments. Fair warning, I'm going to stick to that sandwich theme for a second, so pick your favorite sandwich. Mine is turkey pesto. I wrote that before there was turkey pesto at lunch, so.
Hand of Providence.
Thank you. I was reminded recently that the name of a sandwich is based on what's between the bread. The good moments in this analogy. This past weekend, my 16-year-old daughter climbed into my lap and let me hold her and rock her like a toddler for a solid minute. It was a turkey pesto moment. The two of us had tension earlier that day and would have tension again later that day. But it was still a turkey pesto sandwich moment. The hard parts do not get to take away the beautiful parts. So, to the hope holders, the second chance givers, the ones who seek to learn and love and walk with and believe in the possibility of healing, we see you. To those who are having a hard time remembering your last turkey pesto moment, we see you. Lean into your own sources of strength, find others to walk with you in your journey, and above all else, cling to the truth that hope is possible. To close, I invite you all to stand, please, and join in this exercise that gave me a whole heap of life and energy recently. Find a position that works for you. So you might want a double fist pump pose. You might want to try a superhero pose with your hands on your hip bones. You might choose a gentle self-embrace. You can keep your eyes open, or you can close with a soft gaze, or you can choose to close them. I invite you to repeat after me. I am enough.
I am enough.
I am bringing what I have when I can.
I'm bringing what I have when I can.
Multitasking is for birds.
Multitasking is for birds.
I am not a bird.
I am not a bird.
There is space for wellness in my life and in my work.
There is space for wellness in my life and in my work.
Together, this work is possible.
Together, this work is possible.
Control of all of these things is not mine to carry.
Control of all the things is not mine to carry.
I'm doing the best I can.
I'm doing the best I can.
I will show up.
I will show up.
I will ask for help.
I will ask for help.
And I will look for hope.
I will look for hope.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Jill and Shanda. That was amazing. Oh, I better move back here. So I just want to ask, we have a couple of minutes. Is there any questions? Anyone have a question? Okay, so we got a couple. First over here. Is Robert here?
Not a question, just a comment. Thank you for making such a heavy topic so approachable. I recently lost someone to suicide down in Alabama, where I'm from. And while they were not a youth at the time that they had this happen to them, there were warning signs all along. And I can't help but think if we had some of the things we're talking about here and today in rural Alabama, where I'm from, what a different story it would have been for Alan Blake Phillips. I was nervous about your content today, but you made me feel comfortable and confident and really proud of our state. So thank you for what you do, and you guys could have like a traveling road show. That was fantastic.
Chelsea here.
Yeah,
Chelsea.
and one here.
Thank you.
No,
Hi.
thank you.
Yes, that was a really wonderful presentation. I'm wearing my Suicide Prevention Coalition
Yeah,
of
you
Lane
are,
County
Lane County.
shirt.
Woo!
We meet on the first Monday at 3 o'clock at Willamette Christian Church. If I can recruit anybody who wants to come and be part of that coalition, please join us. But I wanted to let you guys know that our coalition offers QPR training and assist training to community members for free. So you don't actually have to be a Lane County resident to come join us. If you don't mind driving down for that training, we're happy to have you as long as there's space in our groups. So if you guys want to check out our website or go to the Lane County Prevention website, there should be information on our training. I don't know right now at the top of my head when our next assist training is, but I know they're trying to offer QPR 2 to 3 times a month in the community. And again, that's free of charge for you guys if you want to come.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great presentation. So yeah, my name's Ricardo Garcia. A month ago, I got certified as a facilitator in suicide, and in November, I'm signed up for the QPR training. And you know, you'd probably know more information about me, but yeah, I'm just curious. Give me some advice. You know, if I wanted to run a group in suicide prevention, or have a group in suicide. Yeah, so just give me some feedback.
So you're signed up to be a QPR trainer?
Yeah, and
That's
I'm
awesome. Congratulations.
also a facilitator in suicide.
My first thought is first, thank you for doing that, adding that to your list, to your menu. My first thought for groups around the topic of suicide is the kind of rule of 90-10. So it's really, suicide's heavy. I just used my Friday filter. I had a bad word that I didn't say.
Oh, how disappointing.
I know, it is disappointing. And so to keep it 90-10, to acknowledge the hurt and pain and 90% of what helps. Because a group, especially when people who are having thoughts of suicide and loneliness and despair are together, it can get really heavy and in an unhelpful way to others at risk. And so to be real careful about that. Also, with any group, to do really good screening ahead of time around, are they ready for a group setting, or do they need to process really traumatic things on their own? And often that's a line that's hard to kind of assess. But thank you so much. If anyone else is interested in supporting the work of suicide prevention, that Big River flyer is full of opportunities. Most of those are train the trainer programs. And so we have human beings that are hard at work recruiting people to be trainers in every county of our state. And so if your heart is pulled in that direction to create wellness and hope around suicide prevention, we are always recruiting for trainers.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
Yeah.
We have time for one more question. Anyone else? Odelia.
I just want to say gracias, thank you, and congratulations. Because it's like we all know, it's a topic, a myth, then we don't talk about it, and it's extremely high. So thank you, very well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.